Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. It's 4th of July week. We're actually recording this before the 4th, but when this drops, I hope everyone is feeling good and doesn't have any missing fingers or appendages from fireworks and is hydrated enough and didn't overindulge. But if you did, drink some water and some Gatorade. But happy 4th of July to everybody and to our friends up north. Hope you had a good Canada Day earlier this week. Episode 251, we're going to be digging into some margined discussion today. But first, make sure to check out all of our other content. Share us with your friends. Leave us a comment and subscribe if you haven't done that. And freight360.net, you'll also find the Freight Broker Basics course. That's our educational option for how to get started in this industry and build your own company. Ben, how we doing, man? What does the 4th of July look like for you?
Dude, I have no idea. Probably housework, to be honest.
Congrats. You just moved into the new house, right? How's it going?
The house is great, but there is a laundry list of things that need to be done, some immediate, some long-term, and just trying to work through all of those things while unpacking, while moving freight, while doing all the other stuff that...
Yeah, like you see, you got a slightly new background there. You have the same stereotypical picture that you normally have, but how's the office?
I also have the thing I got from you, the Buffalo Polish, which is right in front of it. My office is now mine, which is awesome. I'm no longer sharing it. I used to kind of share it with my wife, so now we both have our own offices. So I got like a full putting green behind me. I have quite a bit of room. Got my own bathroom. And I'm trying to decide actually what the background's going to be. I was trying to think about what I want or what it would look like. Don't know yet. I was thinking about doing something like super commercial, like Freight 360, maybe doing like our logo on the wall behind me. I don't know. Brainstorming different ideas. All gold,
Steven
everything.
Said all gold, everything. Yeah. Well, for anyone listening that's a homeowner or thinking of owning a home someday, here's the one thing I'll always say is a house will take as much of your time and money as you want to let it have and take. So
For sure.
When you said I've got a laundry list of things, dude, it's hilarious. I do too. I have a laundry list of items from my last house that we never did. And it's probably in my phone somewhere. And I've been in my house now for almost 2 years. I have a pile of pictures that go on the wall that have not been hung up yet on my second floor. So things to get done, they'll get done. But yeah,
a little bit of time. That's a nice part.
Yeah.
I'm not in a rush. There's some things you want to get to obviously be able to live in it. So I mean, like those things, more like unpacking the garage and getting pots and pans into cupboards so that we can cook, and unpacking my closet. That's going to take like the better part of the day. But yeah, to your point, beyond that, like I'm not in a rush to do a lot of them. I've got plenty of time to do.
For sure.
For
sure.
What are you doing for the 4th, by the way?
So it's always a busy holiday for my family and my wife's family. So like it's like a whole thing. Like the 3rd, which is today, we're going to be doing. We actually we're marching in a parade. My wife's cousin is the district attorney, and he's running for election this fall. So we're doing a parade for him, and then having a party at our house tonight, and then tomorrow another family party, another parade, fireworks, the whole 9. So it'll be good. And then I don't know about Friday. It's kind of like you're like kind of already at the weekend at that point, but I'll probably get some work done and then eat some leftover food. And whatever fireworks haven't been shot off, I'll get them sent up in the air. So
I'd like to be able to do that. We'll see. Like I know a lot of our neighbors have boats, and we got a dock out back. So I don't know. Maybe someone will take that out. I know they do fireworks down by the beach, and they're supposed to have something at the pool or whatever. We haven't met anybody. I haven't even literally walked around the neighborhood yet. So and probably a lot of that this weekend as well as whatever.
There you go.
Yep.
I don't have anything for sports. Is there anything?
I have nothing sports related. I did see though, and I can't remember the exact number. It was a post, but it was sports related. Scotty Scheffler finished with an average score, I think last year, or maybe like year to date, was like 68.73. And he's 7th of all time, for lowest average throughout, I guess, the entire season. And the other interesting thing was Tiger has 1 through 6. Like
Wow.
literally the lowest, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth. And then Scotty is now seventh for lowest average through an entire year. But thought that was a pretty interesting stat.
Well, news, the big rumbling this week has been C.H. Robinson. The report, it came from FreightWaves, I think, initially, and it was like they laid off 70 people or 80 people or something, like basically half of their sales team, and we're like, everyone's like, they're the largest freight brokerage in the country. There's no way
And
they
that's
only have
like
150
smaller than
sales
an
reps.
office at TQL. Like that's smaller than a small office at TQL. There are floors in the Pittsburgh office that had that many people at TQL. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, insane. So, I think and we had, you and I and Steven had talked about this a little bit in a text earlier this week, but it was basically like, probably it's either misinformation or the way that they like title their employees is different, and they laid off a chunk of a certain type of role, like maybe like a national account manager or something like that. I know with their business model, I've talked to some folks who used to work there, and there's a lot of like pricing people. There's a lot of carrier procurement folks, and it's very like contract and bid heavy. So they might have a smaller amount of actual like your concierge level customer account managers or your sales people, if you want to call it that, that handle certain accounts. I don't know. There's 100%. There's definitely more than
yes.
150 customer facing people in that company. What is your take on that?
Same thing. I'm like, I know that their model has always been cheap freight and low service, meaning like they're going to underbid most of the market and they're going to give back, 10 or 15% of those loads every week because they can't get trucks on them. Right. So like
Yeah.
that's their model and, kind of like their niche in the market where TQO, for example, is high service, high margin, right? Like they're your find you a truck last minute, you're going to pay to get it, but they'll get you one. CH always competed on price. So it didn't surprise me they had less reps, but there's still got to be like account managers that are probably just overseeing their existing customers and maybe they only have 80 or 100 people going at new business. To me is still a very low number. But
Yeah.
again, I mean, you would have to be able to see the entire company's hierarchy and really dig into how and what their staffing looks like and how they, hand that stuff off. I'm not as familiar. I've never worked or coached anybody directly at CH. Met a few folks that have used to work there. I've worked more directly with like Echo, Coyote, folks at TQL, and mid-sized brokers, and even a lot of other ones that aren't like the huge names. So I'm like, I'm the least familiar with CH's internal operations of pretty much any of the other brokerages, other than what it
Yeah.
seems like from a competitive standpoint. Like we just always knew they were cheaper, knew how they were approaching it, and customers would give me feedback on, their experiences with them.
So there's a guy, this is going back like probably 10 years, but like when I was talking with a guy the one summer, I like ran into him. I knew him from like years back, and he's like, yeah, he's like, you work in freight, right? And I was like, yeah, I work at a freight brokerage. He's like, I just started at CH Robinson, the office in our area. This is again like 10 years ago though. And I was like, oh, sweet. I was like, what are you doing there? And he's like, yeah, man, I'm just a broker. And like, he didn't know what he was talking about because he's so new. And I was like, oh, sweet. So like, you got your own customers? He's like, no, man. He's like, I'm just booking trucks. I'm a broker. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, like every
Okay.
company kind
Yeah.
of calls their roles different, but he
Yep.
couldn't tell me. Like, I was like, oh, so like, who gets the accountants for you guys? It's just like, he's like, oh no, I don't know. The company just has the business. So like, he didn't
Yep.
even know where the freight came from within his branch in Western New York. So I'm like, it makes me wonder if they have like some
House
sort of
accounts.
like national level thing. Hey, if anyone listening is from CH, let us know. Reach out to us, and we can
Well,
anonymously get some details from you, or not anonymously. Up to you.
my guess is they're like
Let
house
me know.
accounts where like there
Yeah.
isn't a rep that gets like a big commission. There's probably smaller commissions and salaries for account management where somebody services that account for maybe a few years, maybe a shorter time. And then a whole department just has loads that they got to cover all day and they're just
Yep.
covering loads, right? And there's very little communication back and forth between what is happening in the right hand and the left hand. And to me, like there's efficiency, which is why CH does it, But the huge downside is service takes a huge tank because the person the customer's talking to doesn't usually get the information or any information at all about what's actually going on with their load, right? Because they literally don't know. Like the team, like you just said, that's covering the freight isn't like sending messages back to the rep going, hey, like we need an extra $250 to move this load today. They likely just go, can't cover it. And then they just reject the tender. Where, smaller freight brokerages, I think, have a big advantage on service because they're able to communicate what is actually happening in the market. Hey, I know we're out on this lane that's 4th of July weekend. Like we looked at some lanes this week, same thing. Like, normal rate on that might have been 28 to $3,000. We're hearing, 35 to 4 like this week. So
Yep.
Big advantages, I think, of small companies
business model,
Exactly.
So other news from Freight Caviar, the top 5 countries that were, was it DAT? It was for accessing basically load board services for freight brokerage. United States, Macedonia, Moldova, Lithuania, and Pakistan. And it did say basically VPN usage could be skewing that data, but I was shocked to see Macedonia as number 2.
I haven't heard I didn't know Macedonia, honestly, was like a modern day country. Like when I think of Macedonia, really? I think of like Alexander the Great and like 3,000 years ago history. Like I honestly, when you said that, it kind of like surprised me. Like look it up on a map.
That's funny. Yeah, it's European. And then let's see. Lastly, the gap between contract rates and spot rates is closing. Today marks a new low of a 47-cent split between them. If we reach a 30-cent split and hold, that would signal the end of a market cycle. The way spot rates are trending since April, we could see the market flip by October. And that was from Tanner DeHart on Twitter, X. So, yeah, I did see that this week too. Hey, that would be a Q4. So basically a 2.5 year cycle is what it would sound like. But I do think when we talked to Ken Adamo earlier this year, didn't he say like it's going to be a 2024, but late 2024 when he thought the market would get back to where it should be or flip?
Yep.
And everyone's just like, oh, it just feels so far away. But yeah. Hey, this is like the new normal now, though. I'm like used to capacity being so loose, rates being so low, people like it being just so hard to get new customers in the door.
Anecdotally,
it'll be a breath of fresh air when the market, looks different.
To that point, like I'm hearing from lots of the coaching clients we work with are seeing a lot more volatility in lanes. Like days of the week, they're seeing rates spike more like you would have seen in the traditional market, right? And again, I know Ken made a mention of it, and it also ties in with that other news article saying that, like transportation capacity in June was no growth, like literally stayed flat for the first time in 2 years. So before it starts to shrink, it's going to stop growing, which means that's trending in a way that's favorable to freight rates. And I don't know, I'm seeing it, we're seeing it, people I talk to are seeing it more and more. They're digging into their lanes, they're pricing, they're just getting caught in situations we haven't seen in 2 years, right? Where like rates had been so consistent for so long. In fact, I talked to a guy last week, a few people that were like telling me, they're like, yeah, I know these lanes, these rates have been good for, ever. I've run them. I know how to quote them. And I'm like, well, they've been that way before, but that doesn't mean they'll be that way next week, the week after, or the week after, right? And that's the thing I think is really important for any listener out there, especially if you're quoting freight, right? Is as you're starting to hear more about this, like start digging in more, looking at your lanes. If you can, DAT's predictive model is really pretty good to give you like some insights. Like it's not going to likely, in my opinion, guess what it's going to be 3 months from now accurately, but it's starting to get ranges, right? Like we talked about that Morgan Stanley report that was showing like a predicted market flip in the next 6 months. Like More and more analysts are seeing this in different areas of the country. More this happens, the more we're going to move towards the traditional freight cycles that we're used to seeing, which is good for everybody. And the other thing I want to point out for this, and I think this is often overlooked, especially people that have come into the industry recently, is the industry gets worse for brokers first, then it gets worse for shippers, then the opportunities start to come faster. And it always happens in that order, right? Because if a lane shifts, right, like on the rate of any lane, right, and say it's been consistent and now we start to see this market volatility, you're not going to be able to cover your load or you're going to take a loss because the market starts jumping. Well, that shipper doesn't really notice it. Maybe one broker goes, hey, I couldn't cover your load. It seems a little different, but it's not drastic. So we always get it first. But then when the shipper starts seeing more and more fallouts across everybody they use, the carriers and the brokers, that's when they're willing to start spending a little more on spot
this was
loads.
2020 and 2021, like verbatim,
exactly
what you're explaining right now. Yeah.
Increase their rates, and that creates the opportunities to get new customers because now the service is not flat and consistent. That change that they're experiencing makes them more open to talking to other brokers or new service providers because they genuinely need help, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely, man. That's very, very true. Very true. It feels like so long ago when you were explaining that, and I'm like, yeah, I remember, like, rates would go up, and then basically you started to see like mini bids. Even like customers are trying like anything they could to avoid like everything being spot freight. Yeah, and then like I just remember the frustration of like carriers, and this means no offense to carriers. There were some greedy carriers out there that were like, I'm gonna get $5 a mile and whatnot, and you think about it, and it's like, yes, that is supply and demand, but I don't think. I guess when rates I think they got almost too high too fast, and it ended up. It was just chaotic. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we're going to talk about margin today, and what I think. We could talk about what healthy margin is and how it all impacts business overall. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see another 2020 this next cycle. I think just because of the circumstances with COVID shutdowns, federal money. I think that was all a big whirlwind that threw everything the way that it did. So, in freight, time is money and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well,
segue right into the topic. That's a pretty good segue right into what we're talking about, which are margins, rates.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk margins today. Ben, if you remember, and I won't say the names, but you and I, a couple months ago, we were talking on the phone when I was driving, and we talked about the process of sourcing carriers. And I think there was an issue with somebody who you and I have both worked with, and their concept was, take the first carrier that is available, regardless of the price. There was no negotiation. There was no real sourcing. It was, there's a carrier that's available. Boom, take them. And then you end up with like 8% margins, 7% margins, things like that. And I've had teams in my company that have the same way. Like I talked to a girl yesterday, and I was like, hey, this is what your team looks like right now. Here's the last couple of months. You're profitable and your load count's looking well. I said, but your margin percentage is really thin, and that's not sustainable long term. So we're setting up a coaching to go through for her branch, like very simple, basic concepts to get your margin a little bit higher. And it's not like you're not like it's not even just negotiating higher necessarily with a certain carrier. It's finding a different carrier, a more optimal carrier, things like that. Because there's a lot that goes into the price of a truck. And what I might want to get paid to haul a load might be different than what you might want to get paid to haul that same load because of things like our maintenance costs, how far I have to drive empty to get to my pickup, how attractive is that destination for me, things of that nature that all lead to the price of the truck. So, and the reason that margin is obviously important is that margin is literally what freight brokerage is used to cover all of their expenses and to pay their employees and have company profits. So you could say all day long, yeah, I did $10 million in business last year. Okay, but what was the profitability of that $10 million in business? If it was $100,000, well, that's 1%. You're not going to and you have to cash flow all that or pay factoring fees or whatnot. Yes. So, the way in which your margins, let me restate that. Your margins do impact the health of your business overall. It might sound like an obvious statement for anybody that does any kind of business, but for freight brokers and that are new to this industry, they oftentimes don't realize. They're just like, oh yeah, I can make $50. I'll do it. It's like, yeah, but you made $50 on a $6,000 lane. The cost to cash flow that is likely more than $50. So you actually just lost money, right?
Correct.
And if you're a W-2 rep, you're oftentimes going to see things like a minimum profit on a load to take it, or you're not going to be eligible for commission until you hit certain metrics. And every company is a little bit different, but there's a reason for all that. And to go a step further, when I analyze the health of a book of business within Pierce Worldwide Logistics, where I work, I look at the two biggest metrics I look at for customer by customer is margin percentage and days to pay. Because if somebody has a thinner margin and they're paying slow, that's double bad news, right? You can maybe have one without the other. Having both healthy is great. Like they pay fast and their margins are high. It's kind of a rarity, but let's say they pay really fast and their margins are thinner. Well, that's not that much of a cash flow burden then. It's actually probably helping your cash flow because they're paying fast. And on the contrary, if they're paying slow, but the margins are really, really heavy, well, it kind of offsets it. It's worth a cash flow burden because that amount of fat margin that comes in. So, but you can't, having bad on both of those metrics is a really, really dangerous place to be. And it's a place that'll get you out of business really fast. So I just want to kind of set the stage right with that. I know that was kind of a long rant, but what's your take on that? How do you approach margin when it comes to coaching somebody or someone that's newer to this business?
Well, I think the first thing is exactly what you outlined, like the context, right? What is the whole situation related to margin is important, right? Because I think even for agents, right, especially agents that work under an agency, right, like what they see is their commission split off a load, right? So to your point, hey, I booked a $2,000 load and I got a $75 margin. Well, I'm getting, maybe 60% of that or 70% of that or 50% of that. Like that's extra money in my pocket. If it's an easy cover, why wouldn't I do it? Right. Well, the bigger picture is, to your point, there are lots of expenses that go even with an agent, like even just your load boards, right? $200 DAT, $200 truck stop, 10, $20 for email, another 30, $40 maybe, TMS. Or $80 for a TMS user, right? Like you're $400 or $500 just to start, right? And then you're moving loads that honestly cost money in some ways, right? Like some agencies have insurance, right? Receivables insurance. Some are factoring. And those factoring numbers eat up margin quickly, right? So yes, that agent might get a $35 commission, but the whole company literally lost money in that transaction. So understanding the value of margin to the whole business is going to make you, one, more effective at your job. You're going to be better at it. You'll have a longer career, because if you keep doing that, yes, you can probably get away with it. And maybe somebody is not going to give you a bunch of grief for doing it here or there. But what happens is once people get in the habit of doing it, they do it more. And it's really hard to get them to stop, because also the customers get used to it, the carriers, and they're not learning, I think, which I want to segue into, is like, how do you actually create margin, right? This is the hard part of being a freight broker, right? I think lots of people come into the job with the assumption of, customer gives me a load, they're going to pay me enough that whatever the carrier's off me, there'll be some in the middle. Meaning like, oh, Nate, you're my customer. You give me a load and you tell me your target rate's $2,000. I'll post it up and a carrier will take that for 1,700. Like, that's not the case. The shippers are going to offer
It'd
you
be nice.
Yes, they're going to offer you a rate that is in sometimes lower than what a carrier wants. In fact, in a new
Very
customer,
oftentimes. Yeah, it's because it's a wish list price for them.
Exactly. It is our job to take the situation and explain it in a way that helps get the shipper to pay what is needed for a fair service and fair rate. Same thing for the carrier, right? And you can't really like begrudge or be upset with either side for trying to do their best. Shipper's job and what they get paid to do is move their goods that company sells at the lowest rate and the highest service. That's the performance that their manager holds them accountable to. The lower they pay with the higher the service, the more bonus they get, the more promotions they get. That's their incentive. Yep. On a carrier, you are trying to get every single dollar you can. And especially in a market that has been down for this long, they've got to cover operating costs, sometimes deferred maintenance, insurance. Like all of those things have gotten more expensive and
truck notes
gone down. Right? So you're in a scenario where the shipper's trying to pay you less, the carrier needs to pay more, and you have to be able to get both of them to move in the other direction. You got to get the shipper up and you got to get the carrier sometimes down, but it depends on the situation, right? And like you said, a few common things to just think about is that like if you book a truck 2 or 3 days in advance of a load, right? You are almost always going to end up with a lower margin. And here's why, right? Because the carrier is going to plan ahead. You have less risk. That's why brokers do it. They're like, hey, I don't want to worry about this load for Friday. I'm going to book it Wednesday. Carrier said they'll take it. Yeah, I got a 6% margin, but I don't have to worry about it, right? Now, the carrier was willing to, but did the carrier maybe want to go there? And that's the thing you've got to ask a lot of questions to try to understand, because just because somebody is willing to doesn't mean they want to or that they have to. And that's your margin percentage, right? On the carrier side, you pointed this out a minute ago. If that carrier, say my load is Memphis to Detroit and it's Tuesday to Friday, right? Well, if that carrier ends his week in Detroit because he lives there every Friday, and I am able to understand that, he wants to go there, not just wants to, but needs to go there because that's where he lives. So like that load is a very good fit for that situation on that day for that carrier. Now take another carrier that is also going to be in, the same pickup location the same day, but like he really wants to get home to Ohio on Friday. Yeah, he's probably willing to take your load to Detroit, but then he's going to have to drive home empty miles to get to his family for the weekend. So guess what you're going to have to do? Pay him a little bit more. This is the difference in your margin, right? So actually waiting to find the right carrier and the right fit is going to impact your margin. And then the days at which you do it, right? Like this is just the truth of it, is there are carriers that wait until the day of to book their loads, right? And that is just a gamble. It goes both ways. Sometimes they get lucky and a shipper really needs a load moved and they get above market rates waiting till the day of. But a lot of times they can't wait anymore, which means they're up against the clock and they've got to take the best load available. So typically if you cover your loads day of as a freight broker, you end up with a larger margin than when you cover them ahead of time, because the carriers that are empty that day and don't have a load kind of have to pick the best of what's left.
Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? QuickScope stands out as the only load-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, QuickScope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure, brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with Quickscope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join Today. Yeah,
that's it.
Precisely. So one of the actual practical tips that I've given people, whether you're on a team or if you're just working by yourself, is have some sort of like a target pay amount, right? And that should be your starting point. And then we talked earlier about the CH Robinson, how there's like the different business models and no one's talking to anybody in certain companies. This is where it's extremely important for an account manager or someone who's pricing the customer. There's got to be some line of communication with whoever's covering that freight if it's not the same person, right? So let's say, we'll just go through an example, right? Let's say an arbitrary customer says, we're trying to get this moved for $2,000, right? So you say, okay, $2,000, and we can come back to this and we'll talk about, how to try and get a little bit more out of your customer. But let's say $2,000 is your starting point. That's your goal. All right. Now you might say, all right, my target is a 15% margin. So we'll say no, did I do that wrong? $1,700, right? $1,700 is my target pay amount to my carrier. That's $300 margin and 15%. It's pretty healthy. Carrier rep, when they see $1,700 is our target pay amount, and they're talking to carriers, whether it's through outbound calls or they're fielding inbound calls or they're going through their preferred carrier list, whatever it is. Okay. And if a carrier says, yeah, I can do that for 1,900. Well, you don't just say, oh yeah, that's less than $2,000. I'll take it. No, because you have a target of 1,700. You're not even close to that. You're way up. You're closer to break even than you are hitting your profit number there. So it is very, very important to make sure that you've got some sort of communication, whether it's an internal note or some sort of shared board that you guys are all looking at. But you might talk to, the first person you talk to might say 1,900. The next one might say 2,100, which would be at a loss. The next one might, and then you could talk to these carriers and find out what's important to them. And then if you find the right carrier at the right price that's close to your target, or if not at your target or better, then that's good. But if you can't find that, then you could talk about going back to your customer, trying to explain, hey, here's what I'm hearing from carriers. We're not able to get even close to this. And you have basically one of two options without taking a loss, right? You can talk to your customer about getting a little bit more out of them to secure one of these carriers that's a good fit. Or number two, you just don't take the load. And there's different schools of thought when it comes to taking loads at a loss versus never taking loads at a loss. I believe that you can do it from time to time. I wouldn't do it intentionally often because I think it sets a bad precedent with your customer. But yeah, I mean, it's basically be cognizant of what that margin is, where you want it to be, and it can be different for every customer. Remember, if a customer pays fast, your target margin might be like 10%. Right. And if they pay slower, it might be like, we're not taking anything unless we're at least a 15% margin because of the headaches and how slow they pay, et cetera.
Yep.
Right.
So, right, like just take that same example, right? So say I got 2 or 3 carriers that are viable options. And my target, right, is 17. Okay. And first carrier is at 19, 2 or 3 at 21, right? Maybe one at $2,000, right? What I'm going to do is try to understand what works for that carrier. One, when and where are they going to be empty is a big one. Because if they're going to be empty, very close to my pickup time, very far away, there's a pretty high likelihood they don't make it to my pickup. If that's an appointment, that matters. First come, first serve matters a little less, right? But that is important to me and to my customer, right? Second thing I'm going to try to understand about the carrier is like, what direction are they looking to go? What is important to them? And if it happens to match up with this lane, then I know there's a better likelihood that that's a fit, right? So what I'm typically going to do is like, hey, look, I know you want to be at 19. I got 17 into this, right? let me ask you, if I get my customer to approve a bit of an increase, do you think you can meet me in the middle and maybe get it 18, right? And say that carrier needs that lane and it is a fit, and my shipper works for them, they're fast to load, and everything else being equal, like the carrier's like, yeah, I think maybe I can do 18. What I'm going to do, right, is I'm going to go back to my customer, right? And I'm going to go, hey, I got a few options. And this is where communication is important, right? And this is the value add as a freight broker. When I call my customer, I'm not just going to be like, hey, can you give me an extra $100 on this load so I can book the truck? What I'm going to do is explain very simply what the market just told me. Hey, listen, Sally, I got 2 or 3 guys. Carriers had good ratings, good safety scores, good driver scores. Like, they're all going to be empty kind of in your area. And I think we'll make pickup time no issue. They got the insurance you're looking for. I got 2 or 3 that are like 21, 22, 2300, right? I know your target's 2. I've got one guy I think I could bring in at like 21. Would that work for you? Do you think you can get an approval for an extra 100? So again, remember what I did. So mathematically, carrier has tentatively agreed to 18. I am not telling my shipper that carrier is agreeing to 18. I'm telling my shipper I'm incorporating that 300 right back into it. So when I call my shipper, it's, look, I think I can get you this truck for 21. The other options are all more expensive, but this is the best option for me to make sure it gets picked up on time. And here's the important piece. This is the piece that I think a lot of people miss. No, first off, nobody wants to have this conversation, so they just email rates. It doesn't work when you email it. It only works if you actually have the conversation. So I'm on the phone, and here's like the pivotal piece. As I go, hey, Sally, I've got the driver still on hold on my other line. I've got to give him a yes or a no because he's got another option. Do you want to approve 2100, or would you like me to let this guy go? Now, like, in my head, I see that as like the fork in the road. I'm like, we're at the fork. You got 2 paths, Sally. And I need to know now, do we take him for 21, or do I let him go and we lose the option? After I've already explained all my other options are more expensive. This is the cheapest, the best one I've got that can still make it. If you pass on this, I can't promise you or assure you I get this covered for less than 23. Now, Sally, I know you want to be at 2. Will you approve 21 for this guy, or should I cut him? And then I say nothing. Silence. I'll hit mute on my phone. And now I'm putting Sally in the position she doesn't want to be in. She has to actually make this call on the spot, not wait around, not email me later, not see. And this is the important piece. I don't want her to call all the other brokers to see if she can get a better rate. I want her to tell me right now, you take this or I cancel it, meaning that option is gone. She wants me to email it so she can email all the other brokers and go, can you get me $2,000 before she says yes to my 21? So I take those options off the table by making her tell me in this moment when I mute my phone, and I just use silence. Silence makes her have to sit there and make the decision she doesn't want to. This is why all the shippers send emails and ask you to email rates back. It's so they can play all of us against each other and keep all of the leverage negotiating. My job is to make them make this decision in a way that benefits everybody and doesn't allow me to be bid against anybody. So sometimes they'll say no, and that's fine. Guess what my next option is going to be? Even if that truck's still available in a half an hour, that truck's now $2,300. She'd be like, well, Ben, can't you get it? Nope, he's gone. I got you another one. And the reason I'm going to increase that is not just to make more money on this load. It is to set the habit and the tone that when I say this option is gone, if you come back to me 20 minutes later or an hour later, even if theoretically I can get that truck and that truck is still available, you're going to pay more, because I don't want you to keep doing this to me every time I've got to hustle to find you a truck last minute. If I'm going to go spend 45 minutes to go find you the option, get you the truck that you need to pick up in 3 hours, I don't want to waste all my time while you wait an hour to decide what to do with it. Then the truck's gone and I don't get paid for any of my work. That is what's really important, right? So now I get him to 21. I can go back to the carrier, get him the 18. That's a fair rate. Why? Because the shipper started too low and they paid fair. Carrier started a little too high. He came down reasonably. Everybody wins. Truck gets the load they want. Shipper gets the load picked up when they want. And I get paid for the time it took me to do the work to get them the truck in that short window of time, right? And that's the piece that I think people are hesitant to do because, well, it's uncomfortable to make somebody do that. It's uncomfortable to have that conversation sometimes. So it's just, just send emails. And then they'll email us and go, well, why aren't I getting any loads? This is why you're not getting loads, right? This is
Don't hide behind
why
the keyboard.
you cannot make, this is a full contact business. Like, you can't make money just by emailing rates. I mean, theoretically, I guess you can. That's what CH does. But you need massive volume, massive carrier relationships, and be able to leverage those things. They operate differently than most of the brokers that we work with and most of the brokers that are in the industry, right?
Yeah. So I pulled up one of our blogs from our website because I wanted to be able to reference some stats here. So this one was called "How Important Are Freight Broker Margins." It's from 2020, so it's a little outdated. But so this is 3.5 years ago at this point. The average freight brokerage margin was around 15% and yielded $270 per load in profit. That was 2020. I'm sure it went way higher into 2021, and it might be back around 300 now. It might be 350 now. I have no idea. Those were stats from beginning of COVID times. But here's what I would tell you when it comes to margin, and people, you'll hear drivers that'll be like, "Man, brokers are thieves. They making too much money." There's a big expense to run a brokerage. Cash flow is probably the most expensive part of it. But if you look at, like, take C.H. Robinson out of it, if you look at the average, like, mid-sized brokerage who's been in business for at least 10 years, and you ask them what's their average margin, that's going to tell you exactly what you need to have your margin at to be healthy and sustained long term. And it's usually around 15%, right? Maybe a little less, maybe a little bit higher. But when you have brokers that come in and their whole goal is, we're going to be cheap, we're going to do things lean and thin, we're just going to use a bunch of technology to, auto sourcing carriers, the concept's great, but those companies never succeed long term. We've heard the whole digital freight brokerage movement that started to be talked about 7-8 years ago. Where are they? They're still they didn't take over our industry. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
At the end of the day, when it comes to relationships with customers and with good partner carriers, having a strong interpersonal tact and relationship between you as the broker and them as the customer carrier is going to be very, very important. Price is obviously is a focus, but like you said, Ben, when you call Sally and you say, "Hey, I can get this guy for 21 right now. Do you want him?" Right? If you have a strong relationship with Sally, she's going to give you the benefit of the doubt more often than if you don't have a relationship with her and all she cares about is, if you're brand new, it's got to be price. You're not going to get that. But it is okay, in my opinion, it's to say no to a load. Hey,
For sure.
the carriers that I'm working with here, I'm not even in the ballpark with you. I'm sorry. Right. And that's honest, transparent feedback to your customer, which can do a couple things. Number one, it can call their bluff that all they've got in it is $2,000. But also it gives them value add that this is the pulse of the market right now. This is what Nate or Ben is seeing out there when he's trying to source carriers for us. We don't have to cover every single load. Our job as a freight brokerage is an intermediary. We're going to be able to provide access to the market, and access can be different options, right? Yeah, this one is available today. It's going to be 2,100. If this can wait till tomorrow or next Monday, I can get you one at 2,000 or at 1,950 or whatever that case might be. So,
well, and I think Steven just added this too, and I want to add some context, right? Like, where does that money go? So, and that's a really good example, right? He put this in the chat, says, carriers and owner operators watching are asking, you charge $300, we'll call it margin, right, on a load, right? And they go, detention doesn't even pay that much. And they're sitting there for, a couple hours with a tractor trailer that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, on site, not getting paid that much.
He also said basically $300 an hour, saying that it only takes an hour for us to do this transaction.
That's what I wanted to get to, right? Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is that $300, say it's a $1,000 load and a $300 margin. Say it's a 30% margin on a load. We'll double it for the example, right? A profitable brokerage, in your example, that has been around 5-10 years, that is able to sustain up and down markets and stay in business, right? Like, their average margin percentage on a load might be 15%, which would be good, right? But here's what hits the bottom line. those brokerages, like 3 to 5% is actually what hits the bottom line of that margin. So out of that $300, the owner of that brokerage should expect to take in somewhere between $9 and $15. That's how much profit actually goes into the owner's pocket, usually in net income, right? The rest of that money goes to insurance, goes to load boards, goes to technology, goes to an office space, usually, right? Leasing computers and everything to house
Salaries,
those people, right?
commissions, cost of cash
Salary.
flow,
Exactly. Now the salary piece, we won't get into cash flow yet, but now the salary piece
bad
is
debt,
you've got to
all of
pay
it.
people 50 grand a year at least to be able to sit there, and they've got to make hundreds of phone calls a week for weeks on end before they've got customers and loads. You've got to pay for that. And now to your point, the cash flow. This is the thing that I think lots of owner ops overlook, right? They're factoring lots of loads, so they're getting paid fairly quickly, but they're paying 3% to get that money faster, right? Brokerages are also doing that, right? So when you've got a customer, even like a kind of a mid-sized customer, like if you're moving 25, 30 loads a week, you've got $75,000 to $80,000 that you're paying out every other week to carriers and waiting 3 weeks to get your money. So on a monthly basis, you might have $400,000 literally lent out and money paid to carriers while you're waiting to get paid from your customer, right? There's a cost to that. Even if you self-fund it, right? Imagine if you had $400,000 in a bank account and earn no interest on it. Like that'd be kind of ridiculous. Like imagine if anybody out there has $500,000 and just gets no interest. Nobody would do that, right? So there's a cost to that money. That also gets paid by the brokerage, whether it's their own money or it's a factoring company. And that's not a small number. And when you add all those up, that's why that margin is not what it appears to be to the trucking company sometimes. And also to maybe even an agent in a brokerage because they don't see all those other bills that have to go out every month. There's not a lot left over. And now let's go to the last piece, which is the time, right? You have to spend hundreds of hours developing relationships with shippers to get the loads. And that service directly benefits owner operators that get paid to drive. You can't be on the phone all day talking to shippers and answering the phone and driving a truck. And as a freight broker, our value to a shipper isn't to get loads and book them next week. It's to be available whenever that shipper needs something because that shipper doesn't know when they're going to need help. So most of the help that we provide back to the shippers in our industry are it's 3 o'clock in an afternoon the day before 4th of July, and 4 loads didn't pick up today that need to go out before the holiday weekend because they're all perishable and they'll all be worth nothing come Saturday.
Oh
That's
yeah.
where brokers come in and then they match that need that the shippers have with the carriers that are waiting to get paid more. And you know what? That carrier that waits until 3:30 this afternoon to get a better paying load will probably get paid more today. And they should because they took more risk. They're available waiting for, they know mistakes are going to happen and they should get paid to take that risk. That's why this afternoon you're going to see $1,000 or $2,000 over a market rate to book a load to pick up tomorrow, Friday. And that's why the carrier should get paid for it. They are giving up their weekend, they're giving up their holiday to move that freight and to take that risk. And the shipper benefits from it because that shipper is hopefully getting those loads booked by 6 o'clock so they can leave work and go and spend their time with their family tomorrow and know that work's done. And then the brokers, whether we're with our family or not, are going to be fielding phone calls from carriers to make sure they have the right pickup number, they're at the right facility. And if they break down, we'll find another truck tomorrow without that shipper having to deal with that problem on their holiday, right? And all of these things come at a cost. That's where this margin comes in, right? I think lots of carriers think that like we get loads as broker, like here's your 30 loads for 2 weeks from now, start booking them ahead of time. And then we just send loads out and then just rack up margin and then go and watch TV the rest of the day. Like that isn't how any of this works, right? We
No,
create
you're absolutely right.
we create the market that benefits both of them, both the shippers and the carriers. And the rates aren't going to be the same every day because the situation isn't the same every day, right? Time of day of the week, commodity you're moving, all those things.
I love it. Steven in the chat, you mean freight brokers don't get, like, how drivers get their 34-hour reset. Brokers, you don't get a 34-hour reset? No, we don't, right? You're absolutely
all
right.
day,
And
every day.
there's a comment that I often hear, and it's very straightforward when, and this episode is not to, stick it to a carrier by any means, but if there's a reality check that's needed to be had here, carriers are, by all means, have the right and the legal authority to go solicit freight directly. So if a carrier is unhappy with the concept of brokers having a margin, then you have a couple of options. Number one, go get the freight directly yourself. Or number two, open a brokerage. And you could do both sides of it, right? The reality is the role of the freight broker is oftentimes to create efficiency within the supply chain that otherwise wouldn't exist, with the vast majority of trucking companies being small businesses, right? We're trying to connect all these dots to all these trucks to all these shippers and get them all plugged and play. And we don't do a perfect job at it. That's just not the reality. But we can tell, if a carrier says, well, I want X amount of money for this, and another carrier says, well, I don't need that much money because I don't have a truck payment at 50% interest or whatever. Like, hey, I'm going to run this at, market average. And, that's just the reality of how this works. That's supply and demand. And it's a capitalistic country that we live in. And it's a, capitalistic market. So, but my big takeaway on all of this is margin can make or break you. And this can go two ways. Obviously, low margin, slow paying. We already mentioned it. It'll kill your cash flow. It'll push you out of business. On the flip side, and this happened 2 months ago to a guy that I know. He got greedy, right? He had his margins on a customer close to 40%. And there was some justification on some of the stuff here and there because it was very, very high touch, very high value, very, a lot that went into it. But 40% on average for a long time on a lot of business is, he got greedy, and they bring in a new person in their department that tenders out the freight, and he very quickly lost a lot of lanes. And then within a few months, lost every lane. And then shortly after that, he got ghosted by the customer altogether.
Yes. Yep.
Couldn't even have a conversation. He even tried to save face and was like, all right, yeah, I can drop $500 off this lane. And they're like, you can just take $500 off the lane? Like, you had that much extra money in it? Like, this whole, for years, right? Because COVID rates were a real thing. And then as pricing came down for carriers, and he maintained, got greedy. And then what was originally 18-20% margin became 40 or higher at times. So yeah, it'll catch up to you.
I've learned that lesson many, many times. So the one thing that when I was trained, and what you learned is like, if you can get it while you can, right? Because it's only temporary, right? So when I was learning freight brokerage, like that was a lot of the mentality at the big brokerage, right? High service, high margin. And some of it, like to your point, is really justified, right? Like if you're moving something very oversized that needs very specialized equipment, right? Like there were things I moved that literally probably took me like the better part of like probably 10 hours to 12 hours to book this load, right? Because you had to secure the trailers, they have limited availability. You've got to schedule it. You need to arrange pilot cars. You need routes done to be able to see which bridges they can go around over. So like for sure, there is some situations that require so much time that you can justify a margin on those situations. However, right, let's take a normal situation that you just said, or like, not that COVID was normal, but like say the market flips and you're getting really high margins for a month or two, and the customer's okay paying it because they're paying everybody increased rates because it's just a tight market, right? Like the freeze over in Texas a few years ago where there just weren't enough carriers and the shippers had to pay more to get their freight moved, right? But what you see, to your point, is brokers will hang on to it as long as they can because there's more money there and they are hesitant to be honest with their customers. What inevitably happens, always, I've never seen an exception to this, right? Either that company will talk to a new broker and they'll go, hey, can you quote these lanes for me to give me an idea on those rates? And they'll look and they'll be like, wait a minute, how come you're so much cheaper than the guy? Then maybe they'll get a second quote and that'll be in line. And they're like, wait a minute, why is our current provider 50% above everyone new that says they can move it? Then they'll give them a test load to see if they can run the freight for the lower rate. And then they do. Then they do it again. Then they start to realize this guy has not been honest with me at all, to your point, and they start trusting you a little less. Then you start seeing a little less freight. Oh, I was moving 25 loads a week. Now it's 23. Now it's 20. Now it's 15. This is what's happening behind the scenes because somebody is always trying to take your business and they're willing to be more honest than you are. And you think you're just going to make this forever. The other thing is you are creating financial pain for that shipper, which means at some point, somebody's going to look at this and go do an audit or have maybe a consultant come in and be like, hey, can you look through our freight rates and see if they're in line with the market? Then they're going to find out that this person wasn't honest for weeks or months. Now, once you lose trust, right? It's like that old proverb you always laugh. It's like integrity takes a lifetime to establish, but a moment to like basically piss away or to lose, right?
Yep.
Like it takes you forever to build trust, but it only takes you one instance of lying and they don't trust you forever after that point, right? So like I think it's really important for brokers to keep that in mind, even as markets move where you make larger margins. Like I always try to go back at a certain point. If I'm starting to see my margins widen and the carriers are coming back down, like I'm starting to communicate that with the customer. I'm not going to drop my margin from 40 to 15%, but I'll knock off $100 and knock it to 30. And if the carriers are still lower the week after, maybe I'm down to 25. And I'm communicating this back with my customer because my objective isn't to make the most money every week or every month. It's to work with this customer for the longest amount of time possible because we spend the most time and money to get a customer. So if you lose it, you got months to get another one like that, if not 6 months. So to me, it makes far more even financial sense to be honest, to work on fair margins as soon as you can. Give your shipper the discount, even though it feels counterintuitive, because that will pay dividends into the relationship that you can work with them for years. Because I've never seen one of those accounts that are fat margin that lasted more than 6 months, maybe a year at the most. And then they're furious and never want to work with that company ever again. And anyone they've ever talked to will never want to work with you ever again.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add, and this is just a caveat, is if to prevent the appearance that you're overcharging your customer, if there's any special costs that go into your quote, such as, hey, there's a special insurance cost on this load because it's high value, right? Make sure that your customer is aware of it and what the cost of that policy is. Because if they go and run quotes against, Joe Schmo, who doesn't get that extra insurance and appears to be cheaper, that could make you look like you're overcharging. But did this a few years ago for a oil field project where there was special insurance and other things that went into it. We made sure that the customer knew, like, hey, when you're evaluating this mini bid for this project from everybody, here's what our line haul is, just the straight up line haul, and here's all the extras that there's no margin on this for us. We're just straight pass through on the cost, et cetera. So that way it was transparent. And some people are like, don't share your breakdown of your project or whatever. I think it depends on the situation, right? I want to make sure that if someone from, let's say there's a brand new kid out of college that it's their first time ever quoting a customer, they might not know they got to include X, Y, and Z, right? And it might appear that they're cheaper than me when the reality is they're not providing the same offer or services. So just keep that in mind.
Very, very
any last
important.
thoughts on margin that we got to squeeze in here before we wrap up?
No, I think you put a really good bow on the end. I was going to allude to the same thing, right? Like, and I'll give you just a little brief thing. Like, I used to do a lot of additional services when I moved lots of steel, meaning like we coordinated everything, like ran the stevedores at the ship. We made sure every PO we organized in Excel. We sent the entire list to every receiver, as well as the shipper, as well as the forwarder to know what was moved every day, which POs went where, right? And that took like literally an extra staff person to arrange this every day and to make sure it was done and then to coordinate everything after, right? And to your point, like I added that cost in and I let them know, hey, this is a service we'll provide for you. It's included in the margin. If you don't want us to, somebody has to do that. We're more than happy to do it. But if we don't do it and you want a lower rate, then somebody on your team has to do this because somebody has to be tallying this up every day. And the people loading the trucks at the port can't do it. So, that was a scenario where, to your point, like, you want to make sure they understand what they're getting and what they're paying for and allow them to choose. Like, I've always been a big advocate of, because to me, when I showed them that and I'm like, listen, we'll do this, after a month, for sure, everyone still went, well, like, this is expensive. We think we can get somebody cheaper. And I'm like, great. Do you have somebody that's going to do this if you guys take over arranging this? And they're like, no, that's why we're still going to use you. Because they had to literally hire somebody, find someone that knew how to do this, that was going to be able to communicate, that wasn't going to drop the ball. Because if there's a mistake made, there's huge cost to that. Redelivery, all these things. So like, when they understand that, people are more willing to pay for when they understand what they're paying for, as opposed to comparing, like you said, price to price. Yep. Know what is in that price, because they're not all created equal, for sure.
Yep, exactly. Well, great discussion. Let us know what you guys think in the comments, or leave us questions if you have them, and we'll get to them on our Final Mile series, which comes out every Tuesday. Ben, final thoughts.
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.